Alright, so this lesson is going to be on using Bloom's taxonomy for the cognitive domain. We're actually going to talk about overall Bloom's taxonomy first and then kind of just focus on the cognitive domain. Alright, so our objective is to identify the original revised taxonomies, and then we're not going to write and create performance objectives or create objectives for assigned TEKs. I'm going to go over that in another lesson later. So I'm going to kind of break these up, those objectives up. So we're just going to really focus on what is Bloom's taxonomy and what it can be used for. So the purpose of Bloom's taxonomy is to provide a framework for language to better describe what was being taught and learned, or objectives. And so this is going to lead us into that final assignment of writing objectives that you have to turn in. It is divided into 3 domains with quasi-hierarchical divisions, and so we'll talk about those. The 3 domains of Bloom's taxonomy are cognitive, affective, and psychomotor. Obviously, cognitive, we've talked about cognitive a lot in this course. That is mental skills or abilities or the knowledge, being able to know and process information. The second domain, affective, is feelings or emotional areas or your attitudes, and then psychomotor is manual or physical skills. And so just the things that you can actually physically do are those psychomotor skills, or what that domain is about. Again, we're only going to focus on the cognitive domain for this class, and so that is the mental skills and knowledge, and it is broken up into 6 levels. You have knowledge, comprehension, application, analysis, synthesis, and evaluation. We're going to talk about what each of those means. But I'm going to show you first a couple of graphs of Bloom's taxonomy. This first one is the most common way you might see it. So it's kind of foundational and builds up. And so the lower level is knowledge, and it moves up to comprehension, then application, and analysis, synthesis, and evaluation. I'm going to go ahead and tell you this graph and the next graph I'm going to show you, they have some words that are tied to each level. So like under knowledge, you see describe, list, identify, define, recall. Those are good words to use when writing objectives to hit that level. So if you want to be on the level of knowledge, you might say describe what Bloom's taxonomy is, or list the levels of Bloom's taxonomy. So that would be knowledge level. Do they just know it? And then, of course, evaluation would be judge or critique. So critique the different levels of Bloom's taxonomy. That provides a whole different cognitive ability than just being able to list those levels. So again, the lower levels are knowledge, and then it builds up to evaluation. And this is the original Bloom's taxonomy from 1956, and we're going to, here in just a second, you'll see that they updated it in 2001 and some things changed. Alright, so here is another graph. I'm just putting this one up here. I don't like this visual representation of it, but what it does is it does provide some more words that you might pull from in writing and developing your objectives. So keep this in mind when you're trying to write objectives. You might come back here and look at the words that are on this graph to help you out with that task. Alright, so again, the original Blooms on your left, they're all nouns. So knowledge, comprehension, application, analysis, synthesis, and evaluation. They went back in 2001 and changed it and decided that they wanted action verbs to represent the levels, and that evaluation wasn't the top level, wasn't the hardest, most cognitive, strongest, deepest cognitive ability that a student can do. So they switched it up. And so the new one is actually remembering, understanding, applying, analyzing, evaluating, and then creating as being the top level of Bloom's taxonomy. And so when you create something, you're using all of your cognitive abilities. And so you're actually having to pull things together to create it. So keep that in mind, that there is an original and a revised, and the revised uses verbs, action verbs with the ing at the end, and that the creating is the highest level on the revised. Alright, so again, the categories from noun to verb, it reflects different forms of thinking. Thinking is an active process. Verbs describe actions. Nouns do not. And they reorganize categories. Knowledge equals product, outcome of thinking, and approach to describe a category of thinking. So now remembering, we want to remember information. There's comprehension. We're not comprehending, but understanding. And the synthesis is now creating to better reflect nature of thinking described by each category. So it makes everything more actionable. All right, so then the changes in emphasis. We want more authentic tool for curriculum planning, instructional delivery, and assessment. So it reflects that now. And it's aimed at a broader audience and easy applied to all levels of education. So you can use it elementary school through graduate school. And then revision emphasizes explanation and description of subcategories. All right, so let's talk about the categories themselves. What are they? So we're going to go from the lowest category to the highest category. All right, so remembering, the learner is able to recall or restate information. And so this is the most basic form of learning. It's like I said, being able to recite lists, those sorts of things. So the power words that you might use are define, describe, identify, label, recite, recognize, who, what, when, where, why. So define cognitive ability or identify different things, label these things, recite things, list the levels of Bloom's taxonomy. So some sentence stems, so things that might, if you're going to ask questions, so you can use Bloom's taxonomy in writing objectives and developing questions. So some sentence stems might look like, how do we define Bloom's taxonomy? Or list the levels of Bloom's taxonomy in order, or who is Bloom? So those are very basic levels of learning. All right, so when we step it up a little bit, we don't want to just be able to recite things, but we want to know that you understand things. So the student can interpret or translate what has been learned. So we might have them classify, clarify, model, paraphrase, summarize, explain, interpret, elaborate, or generalize. And so please restate the meaning of Bloom's taxonomy, or how would you identify the knowledge level of Bloom's taxonomy? And so it's going a little bit further than just being able to tell me what it is, but how you would know that that's what it is. All right, so then the third level is applying. So now we know that you know the basic form of it, you can cite it, you understand it, but we want to know that you can apply or use it. So the student uses information previously learned in a different context. So determine, organize, conduct, compute, carry out, develop, adapt, solve, calculate. So develop a set of instructions for using Bloom's taxonomy, or explain another instance where you might want to use higher levels of Bloom's taxonomy. So those, how do they actually apply the information that's being given to them? Or write objectives using Bloom's taxonomy, like you're going to have to do for this course. All right, so analyze. So analyzing, students break apart information into components. So they're not just gonna be able to use it, but they're gonna take information and they can break it down into different pieces and see that there are multiple components to different types of information. All right, so the power words would be focus, document, point out, proofread, catalog, contrast, differentiate, edit, distinguish. So some sentence stems. What are some of the problems of, or what must have happened when, or validate your position on using different levels of Bloom's taxonomy. All right, evaluating is going to take it just a step further. And so now we're not just going to analyze, we're going to have to analyze and then make a decision on stuff. So the learner makes decisions based on reflection, criticism, and assessment. So the power words would be defend, justify, measure, prove, critique, debate, support, test. What are the pros and cons of using higher levels of Bloom's taxonomy, or what influence will something have if something else happens? So think about evaluation in that a decision has to be made. So it's kind of like livestock judging. You're going to analyze all the different animals that are out there, but then you have to make an evaluation on which one was better, right? And then which one was second best, which one was third best, and so forth. And so it takes that ability to analyze to another level, in that we're not just going to break stuff down, but we're going to determine what is better in whatever it is that we're evaluating. All right, and then the last level is creating. So the student creates new ideas, information, or products based on previous learning. So now we're able to do everything that's out there. We analyze it, we can evaluate it. Now we can take information that we've already know through analyzing and evaluating and create something new. Okay, so taking the information we have and creating something new is what this level is about. So generate, publish, devise, coordinate, assemble, construct, design, invent, plan, produce. So I might say create a new graph to display Bloom's taxonomy. And so you would know about Bloom's taxonomy. You'd be able to analyze it, break it down, evaluate which pieces are better. But then you'd create some whole new visual for us to look at and use to understand Bloom's taxonomy. Now, obviously, I'm not going to ask you to do that, but that would be an example of creating something. All right, so some sentence stems in. Develop a proposal to, or if you didn't have blank, how would you blank? And so those are just some different ways that you might incorporate the use of creating within asking questions or developing objectives. Okay, so lots and hots. So that's lower order thinking skills and higher order thinking skills. You've heard me say lower and higher a lot already. The bottom three categories are your lower order thinking skills. So remembering, understanding, applying. If you think about it, it doesn't take a lot of cognitive ability to remember or understand something. But if we want to analyze, evaluate, and create, it does take a lot more cognitive ability. So those are our higher order thinking skills. We want students to use higher order thinking skills as often as possible. They can't do that until they've mastered the content on lower order thinking skills. So think of as you develop courses, content, and those sorts of things, that you've got to provide that foundational knowledge. And then as they develop that foundational knowledge, you can challenge them more with the higher order thinking skills. All right, so who cares and how come? We use this to assist in planning and develop our units, our lessons, scope and sequence our program. All of that is important, and of course, it's the foundation for how we ask our questions and how we write our objectives for our lesson plans. And so that is actually going to be the next lesson, is writing objectives, and that's actually the last lesson. And once you've gone through that, you'll have everything you need to complete this course. But that is Bloom's taxonomy in a nutshell.